Thank you, Juanita, for that incredible introduction, and welcome to everyone involved in the participation of today's session. I look forward to sharing an hour with you in an interactive, hopefully engaging and informative session on legal duties of the board. I by no means represent the legal perspective. I have sat in several boards across the world, sat at boards in nonprofit organizations in Peru, as well as Thailand, as India, and different parts of the world. I currently am an ex-member of the Big Sister Board. I was the chair of the Sexual Assault Center Board for a few years. They were a collective, so most of my experience come from the collective experience, as moving from collective to management board. I noticed from the people who've signed on today that we have a good representation of both directors, executive directors, staff members, so I'm looking forward to getting your input and your experience. So at any point, feel free to type in your questions. So we'll get started. So welcome again, thank you, and I'm hoping that this will get us on the same page. So one of the things that I want us to look at is what does it take to be a board member, and what does it require of you? And when I say that, I mean the legal responsibility that entails in the duty that you sign on for when you say, I want to volunteer to be a board member. For a lot of us, when we say that, we are excited. It's an opportunity for us to give something back, but we do not necessarily have the experience or knowledge about the legal undertaking that we are about to assume. And this is why we have decided to do this information session, is just to prepare people a little bit more for, when I say yes to being a board member, what should I do to ensure that I do not fall into liability type situation? So conflict of interest, how does the bylaw govern me? So one of the things that I did before organizing this is that I went to the Act for non-profit organization. So there's a whole corporate laws, and I will cite that at the end of the session. There's a whole resource list that's available to you. There was some peer learning that was done prior to this session, and the first slide just kind of gives you the connection to what we're going to be doing in the next series and what has already been done. So when you have a chance, please check out the links. Very important, the OrgWise site, for you to kind of do a retrospect of the peer learning that has done. Today's session will be followed up with a Q&A on Thursday, 10 to 11, and I hope to see you back then. So any questions, please feel free again to type it into the chat box. Okay, today's objective: to explore options to help you run more effectively as a board, to avoid lawsuits and liability issues, to look at standards for actions that may be taken against you, to understand the power that is in the role of chair of board directors, and to explore best practices. So one of the things that I've done is I've kind of made it as a how-to best practice, and then at the end we're going to look about the liability piece specifically of if you're sued and under what type of situation can you be sued. So I want to kind of look at the legal duties, the constitution that govern boards, and every board, irrelevant of your type, has constitution and bylaws, who can sue you, and how to reduce the legal risk of being sued, the implication of the decisions you make. So when you vote on a decision as a board member, what is the legal implications of that? And what do you do to ensure that your vote is recorded, whether you agree or disagree to the decision? And again, the committees who take on the responsibility to do various action on behalf of the board, what are their duties as well? So let's start off with looking at types of boards. So the people who are in the room, I'm sure everyone here has been involved with one of the various boards that I'm about to list right now. I gave a quick definition for those of you who may not be familiar with. the different organizational structure so that you have a little bit more background as well. So the first kind of board is the operational board. That's the one that basically the board manages or governs the organization. Very simple, straightforward. Collective, these are the boards that I've had a lot of experience with, and the beauty of collective is that everyone has the voice. The negative part of collective is that you can't move forward until everyone agrees to disagree. So it's time consuming. I like collective because it brings me back to a lot of the grassroots work that I used to do. Management board, again, it's simply stated, the board operates as a management committee, and they have staff members who are then given directive on their behalf, and they manage the organization. We have the constitutional type of representational where it's official. So this is something that we may not get as much in the nonprofit sector, more of the governmental type of organization where you're elected as you're elected member by the public to serve on an official governmental board. Then we have the traditional board. I think most of us are probably more familiar with this model, the board governments, where the board has committees, subcommittees that operates on their behalf. You have a chair, vice chair, treasurer, and basically the work is done within the confines of this traditional model. We have the result base, and it's exactly that. You have a goal and an objective, and it's driven, and all of the action of the boards, the policy, the mandate, is driven to the outcome of the funding, and your main priority is to achieve the result of your mission. The executive director and the board chair works very closely together in achieving this particular model. Not saying that the executive director and the other models do not have the same type of communication or interconnectedness, but I think in the result-driven board model, they tend to have more so of a hands-on role. Then we have the policy Carver model board, which is about setting policies and standards for the organization in consultation with the executive director on staff. So the board basically has the freedom to determine the organizational structure, and that's usually done at the beginning of any new collective or new joining of members. So you vote in a new member, they sit, they look at the structure, they do a review and decide, do they continue on as a policy. Strategic plan usually come into place if you're going to change your model of operation. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Then there's also the advisory model. So again, you selected individuals who then works with the director. This provides kind of a legal or legitimate see to the operation. So the bottom line of this structure is that they rubber stamp that are brought forth by the executive director. So they're not necessarily actively involved in the day-to-day operation. Their basic role is to act on recommendation that comes in from the people who do the day-to-day piece. And anyone in the room who are executive directors who have sat on advisory board will be able to talk a little bit more to the role here. So this definition came from the Effective Approach to Governments by Mel Gill, and I've cited the structure and the resource, so feel free to look them up and do a little bit more reading to help you to understand more about the structure that you yourself operate under. So at this point, if you have any questions, please type it into the chat. Again, remember in the OrgWise website, because the Q&A, if I do not get to all the questions today, we'll be getting to them on Thursday. Okay? So the important part here is, for me, when I take on the duties of a board member, it's important for me to be informed as to what my duties are. There's actually a session on roles and responsibility coming up for boards, but it's also important that I understand not just my duties but when I have an interest, and that interest, how does it impact the community? How does it bring about change? So I get involved in boards for the reason of I have an interest, I live in a specific area, and I want to give something back. I think most people who are involved in the boards come to it for the same reason. They want to give something back. They want to help a cause move forward. They live in a community where they want to bring about change. So I think the key elements, and we all share as board members, are we want to help move a cause, personal or political, forward. So the type of structure that you take on as a board is usually influenced by the complexity, the demographic, personal and political agendas of the members around. So 20 or 30 members coming together saying that we have a shared personal view, shared political view. We are from a rural area or we are from an urban area. We want to see changes brought about within an organization with an issue that we believe, so we're going to become volunteer staff members to help do more work. I just have to take a few seconds here, so give me a minute. Due to technical difficulties, we'll be right back. Can I just have, I can't say a show of hands because we're all across the country, but I was wondering if you can type in and let me know if the slides are moving from where you are sitting. Are you able to see the slides that I'm changing? Can someone or a few people just type in and say, yes, the slides are moving, no, they're not? I would appreciate it because I know they're moving on my end, but I can't see what you're seeing. So far, so good? Okay. Go. Okay, so as I was saying, the model will reflect the culture, circumstance of the individual. I think it's also important at this point that I say that when you're going to look for board members, it's not important that the board member has a legal background, but they should have an understanding of what they're about to undertake. The section that talks about orientation will focus a little bit more on the board orientation and what the recruiting process entails. This is where I think the executive director becomes kind of the most important part in the explanation around the legality that is involved, because they have the historical context of the organization, because as you know, from year to year, a board may turn over, and they may turn over 5 or 10 people at the same time. They may only turn over 1 or 2. So in order for you to have the continuity, it's usually the executive director or the minutes that has been taken in the past that serves as a history of action voted upon by members past and present that helps us to understand where we go and the legal responsibility that you may be entering into as a new board member. Slides changing. So let's look at board of directors and governance. So board meets annually. As soon as the board is elected, you review the mission statement. Why is it important to review the mission statement? Because again, if you don't have an understanding of what it is that you're working towards, you cannot avoid legal pitfalls. So it's important that right off the bat that you understand the organizational mission. Once you understand that, then the board can monitor the policies as well as emerging trends to see, are you still on track with the responsibility that you've undertaken? And what I mean by that is very simple. if the policy and the mission statement changes when a new board comes in, then you also have to change your bylaws to reflect those new constitution. So it's important that you understand the mission statement, because the mission statement also leads to the value of the organization. And when you're acting in the best interest of an organization, you have to know the values of that organization. And the historical piece is the mission, why are we here? So review that before you step into your role, especially as a board chair. This is where you are charged with the responsibility of understanding the missions and the value, because it's your responsibility as the chair to ensure that the new board members are brought up to speed and they also understand that. As I said earlier, in the orientation session, we're going to talk a little bit more about the resources that would be available for new board members and how you work with the executive director to ensure that the new members are brought up to speed with the old members of the board. So the suggestion for achieving the 3 points I've mentioned is the executive director and other leaders define focus on the annual report in regards to the mission. So the mission and purpose of the organization is charged to the executive director again to ensure that the chair understands. The board sets and review organizational policies to ensure that the organization is on track. So by doing these simple steps, you already have alleviated opportunities for inconsistencies, right? Again, the executive director, the chair of the board, the directors are always in conversation prior to meetings to just make sure that the service, they understand the service, they understand the outcome, they understand if a motion is being brought forth by the staff, they understand the historical piece. So it becomes crucial that the chair, the executive director, has a good rapport. I know some of the boards that I've sat on, I've had challenges in the past where that relationship wasn't very fluid, and it took us a long time to kind of get on the same page. And that's why I think it's so important that we spend that extra time in the beginning as new board members to understand the job description of the executive director. Because by understanding the executive director and his or her role, understanding the model of board that we're operating under will eliminate a lot of the struggles when it comes to actually passing votes, like making votes and decisions. So originally I said that I looked to the Act for Nonprofit Organization, and one of the things that I came up with was this is a part of the Act, and it basically talks about the idea of constitution and bylaw. And I'm not a lawyer, so when I went through it, I had to really pick through the pieces to come up with something that I could actually speak to that made sense to me. So not having my legal hat on, and I would suggest that everyone after this session make sure that their boards do have an opportunity to understand the constitution and bylaws that govern their particular organization. So it basically says that the board has the power, the authority to amend any bylaws. So again, in order for you to amend the bylaws, it has to go through a process of discussion. Hopefully the bylaws will be changed in reflection with the needs of the community and change in relations to the needs of new services. Once it's gone through the discussion, committees have been formed, then you have a vote. All the people who voted for is written down. All the people who voted against is also written down. Because you don't want 2 years from now someone came up and say, well, I didn't agree to this change, and as an end result, I'm going to take you to court because you're no longer operating under the standards of the Act. So it's important that we understand the purpose of bylaws, and it is to help you to make amendment, to come up with resolution. It's a way for us to kind of be legally guided for the work we're about to do. So the legal guidelines for boards come from the bylaws that they operate under. Very clear. Okay? Risk management. Best practice, executive director provides the board with information. And that, again, I come back to, the executive director has the historical piece of the organization. So as an end result, is the key person to understanding pitfalls around management issues. So he or she, again, helps the board to, to define, to understand bylaws and regulations. I'm sorry, we're just having a little bit of technical difficulties. Just bear with me, please. I just want to move the mixture so that you're able to see all of the That's why I ask if everyone, can everyone see the screen clearly now? Okay, I'm assuming if I can see clearly, then you're also able to see clearly. Otherwise, please let us know. Okay, so going back to best practice around risk management. So the risk management piece is the audit, the personnel piece, the health and safety piece, how the organization runs. As a board member that comes into 2 or 3 meetings a month, this may not be something that you're versed in. So again, it ties back to your working relationship with the board. One of the things that I used to do as chair of boards is that once in a while I would just kind of call the executive director and just check in and say, is there anything before the board meeting that I should be aware of? The ones that I worked with was very good about keeping me up to date of situations, so I was never blindsided when there was an audit that needs to happen, or there was internal situations where staff was being hired or job description needed to be vetted. So I've had the pleasure of actually working with some very, very dutiful executive directors in the past, and it has made my time on the board so much easier because that working relationship of having open communication allowed me to just be able to call that person up and say, here we have a financial report and something doesn't make sense to me. Can you spend a few minutes and just explain it? And that actually helped me to be able to facilitate my meetings more smoothly because of that relationship. So working hand in hand. It's very important to the accountability as well. For leadership, where you're wearing several different hats and you're not a staff, you may not be versed in the sector, you may be completely new to the field, it's very important that you have that open communication to help you to understand, especially things like liability insurance. Although we sign off as board members and say, yes, we need liability insurance, yes, we need a benefit plans, the details of that, we may not know the complete details. So again, it goes back to the executive director to just lend clarity on how each thing we sign on has implication for the staff who then facilitates the day-to-day operation. Okay? Any questions at this time? Okay. Duty of service. And I love this statement because it is a duty that you undertake because you're given power in the position of chair, vice chair, secretary, treasurer, directors, and that responsibility, that duty needs to be taken very seriously. It is a legal responsibility, and it doesn't end when you step away from the board, because up to 2 years after you've served on the board, you still have the legal responsibility for some of the decisions that you've made. So earlier I said it's very important that we document. So minutes becomes extremely important. Good minutes, and I don't just mean the minutes where you're writing, you know, Yolande said the following thing. It's like, what are we voting on? What were the decisions? What did we just pass, right? Where are the minutes kept? How accessible are they? They are legal documents. If the board ever gets into a situation where the organization has legal issues, you have to make sure that those minutes are clear. So the power that is entrusted on you needs to be taken very, very seriously. And I think your due diligence needs to be given to any new board member who is going to do that undertaking. And it becomes extremely important that you understand that you also hold the responsibility, the legal responsibility of that organization. Okay? So duty of management or supervision of management falls also under the Act for directors and officers. And there's a very huge section, I think it's probably about 10 or 15 subsection of 124 that basically outlines members, their roles and their responsibility, and it's not just about management and supervision and the activities of the corporation, but it clearly outlines where the powers for directors and officials lies and under what situation. And as I said to you in the beginning, I'm not a lawyer, so I did not want to speak to the Act, but I would like people to go to the Act and have a better understanding. So I think a board meeting would be a good thing to do where the board takes the Act and basically ensures, if they haven't already done so, that they understand the roles, the legal roles of directors as outlined in the Act, starting with subsection 124. Okay? Questions at this stage? So, what are the differences between managing board and operational board? As I said at the beginning, I gave the definition, and a board that manages is a board basically who they work as the executive director. So they are the managers, they are the front line, not front line per se, but they're the ones who make the financial day-to-day decision about the board. An operational board, you basically sign off on recommendations that are made by the executive director on the staff, and you ensure that policies, standards, and procedures are in place to ensure that the board and the funding, the board's decision and the funding is in line. Another question that we have is, what's the difference between management board and operational board? I think those two questions are very similar in the sense that a management board has a group of individuals. It might be as small as 5 people, or it could be as more 20 people, and their job is to manage. It's inherited in the word management board, so that's exactly what they do. They manage the day-to-day operation of the organization in the sense that staff, executive director work with the board to make decisions. The operational board, decisions are made again around practices of, so we want to have a new program. And in order for us to implement the new program, we need to first have the activities, the standards, the procedures. So as an operational board, I would be putting guidelines in place for how you operate those particular activities. I hope that answers the questions. If not, please go back to the definition where I clearly stated the different types of boards at the beginning and how they work in relations to the organization. Other questions? None at this moment. Okay. So I talked about the duty of service, and I think that one is pretty clear. You take on the responsibility to be a board member. You have a legal responsibility to be open, honest, transparent. The decisions that you make has long-term implication for the organization. And there have been lots of examples in the past in the community, Mississauga, around Ontario, where lack of duty of service has led boards to run into difficulties where they've lost funding, where people have been sued, because the proper measures haven't been put in place. So I think it's very important for us to understand the power. And the power of a board member, we talk about it a little bit more as the session goes on. Again, I couldn't come in as a board member and basically say to the executive director, I don't like the chair in your office. I don't have that power. But as a chair within the board, I can come in and say, I don't understand the deficit, and I didn't have any information about why we're running a deficit prior to the meeting. So those are the difference. I can question things around operation as a chair of a board, but the day-to-day running of the organization, unless I'm an operation or a management board, is usually left to the front line, the executive directors. So it's important that we understand that piece, the power. What power do you have? Okay. Access to information. So as a board, one of the things that I always make sure is that our minutes were accessible to all. And it was prepared in a very timely manner. So after each board meeting, minutes were basically 2 days later in the binder. It was accessible within the organization so that anyone within the public who wanted to see what we were doing, it was transparent, it was clear, we were accountable. Because you don't want to have where you're entrusted with money. People know that you're entrusted with $2.5 or $3.5 million, and they don't have an understanding of how that money is spent. As a public entity, those records needs to be accessible. And I think that's one of the issues that a lot of boards who failed, they failed with their record keeping. Because in a meeting, so many things happen during the or coming to a decision that we sometimes forget that after the fact that it has to be documented, and it has to be documented in a way that a layperson can understand it. Because if I'm not in the sector and I come in and I basically say, okay, your annual report reflects that this is what you're doing, I should be able to take that report, I should be able to take the minutes and be able to go through it and not feel completely lost or like I need a translator, okay? So again, it goes back to the executive director, the chair, will prepare the any of the information, and it usually shows in the annual report. And that if you want to know how well an organization is running, you usually look at their annual report. And as a board chair, if you really want to know if you're doing your job, then you look at the annual report and your contribution to it, and that will tell you the relationship that you have with the executive director on the staff and your understanding of your role. Okay? It's also communicating in clear writing, as I've said, so that you can understand decisions that are made. And it's not so much for the people that are within the organization, but it's for the shareholders who may have an interest in what's being done. And the documentation it's filed in a place that's accessible to all, secure place, I might say. So it's not just in the desk at the receptionist where you can walk off the street and just say, it's accessible to me. It has, because again, it's legal document, it needs to be kept in a file cabinet on the lock and key, and access to it cannot just be, for everyone without clarification of their rationale for wanting that information. So once I've presented myself and I say I'm interested in your annual reports and I want to see your financial statements and that type of stuff, if I am a director or if I am a member at large in the community, then I go to the executive director or the chair of the board and I have access to that resource. So there's still a process, even though it's the public documentation, there's still a process to access it. Financial disclosure. Very important as a board that working with the executive director that you understand the budget. When I sat on the chair, it was like having animal cracker soup, because there are so many different deviations within the budget that I had to sit down and basically take the A's out and understand the A's, the B's, the C's. So I would entrust anyone who is going to step into the role of the chair that if you do not have a good background in accounting, which I don't, because to me, I might as well be speaking Dutch when I look at a financial statement, but I surrounded myself with people who had very good understanding and sat with them, including the executive director, and worked through a couple of financial statements. And then I became very good at being able to understand where the money was allocated, how it was spent, when we ran a deficit, why we were running, what happened to the money that were reserved, how it was accessed. So that was part of my responsibility as a chair, to ensure that I understood those things so that whenever we were voting on a new budget based on funding, I understood exactly what it is I was voting for. And when the financial statement was printed at the quarterly or annually, I was able to sign off on it because I knew what I was signing off to. So I charge chairs of boards to work with your executive directors, with your staff ensemble, to make sure that you also understand that, or to work with the treasurer on the board to make sure you know and you understand the financial pieces. So again, making sure that the financial statements are completed on time, that they are, again, periodically you need to go through the operational standards and basically make sure that you are in keeping with the financial management of the organization. Without money, organization cannot exist. So if you are in charge with money, the executive director has the responsibility on behalf of the organization to ensure that it's allocated according to the mission, the values, the program. But it directly, the board member is also responsible for the financial solvency of the organization. So part of the jobs of the board member as well should be to look at other options for funding. I think what happens sometimes is that we get to this one source of funding and we rely on the one source, and when we do the strategic plan, board members should actually be saying, okay, what are the growths, what are the trends, what is the staff asking us, what are the board of directors reporting, so that we're going out and we're looking for new resources to help the organization grow. And in doing so, we are making the board financially independent. One of the boards that I worked for in London, Ontario was Big Sister, and one of the things that we as a board was charged with, we had to come up with 65% of the revenue for the board. So as an end result, we had to come up with a lot of annual giving, very creative ways to get money donated to the board. And I'm happy to say that in the time that I was involved with that board, that we were able to raise more than 65% of the money that was required to keep the board running. And I actually attributed that to the connection that we had with the staff, because the staff was very, very good about saying to us, here are the trends, this is what we need, and how can you help us? And then once we did that, then we were able to then say, okay, here is operational money, or here's money that we can use for programs or special project for the community. Any questions? Okay. The accountant, again, board members are responsible for raising money, as I just said, and instructions report through which members may fulfill their responsibility. So we need to know that. As members, we need to know that. We need to understand that. And it sounds like I'm saying the executive director, and the poor person must be tired of hearing their name, but it's true. The executive director plays such a crucial part in the operation of the organization and the understanding of board knowledge. So without the executive director, if you are not a management board, the likelihood is you do not have the information. You don't have enough time. I didn't have enough time to get all that information. So I look to the executive director to help me to get up to speed. So please, I'm not saying to add any more work to the executive directors because they're already taxed, but what I am saying is we need to work in conjunction with them in order to ensure that the financial, the accountability, the missions, and all of the stuff that has been historically voted upon, that we continue to move forward and we build upon it. Okay? The other thing that is important in this best practice model is the strategic involvement. One of the things that you may choose to do is to have a committee that is struck up specifically to look at funding issues for the board, the organization, and that committee may be a one-time committee, it may be an ongoing committee, and their role is basically fund development on behalf of the organization. So they look at new contracts, new options for fundraisers, new resources, investments, and all of that type of stuff. And then they report that information back to the board. The board then votes on it and then puts it into practice if it's agreed upon. If not, then there's a vote as well to decide that it's not going to happen. Again, please feel free at any time to ask questions. This is why we're here, is to make sure that your questions are answered. And as I said, I'm trying to just give some basic examples of how to do best practice to help us eliminate possibilities of liability issues. By no means this is conclusive. There are a whole bunch of other practices out there. These ones I found to help me in my time as a chair of a board, and I'm hoping that as an executive director or a chair or a director or a member, this will help you on the path, especially if you do not have a lot of experience as a board member. This is a good starting place. It's important when you are matching committees with board members. So if you're striking a committee up that is the executive committee to do recruitment, or the recruitment committee, the fundraising committee, and you basically are saying, okay, we have 10 board members, everyone is tired, so anyone who is interested, you can just join the committee. I can guarantee you that that's not going to help and you're not going to get anywhere. So it's important that you match the interests of the board members with the committees that are being struck. Not only the interests, but the expertise. So as I said at the beginning, my expertise was not financial, but I did sit on the financial community because I wanted to have more understanding of the finance of the organization. So that's why I sat there, but I had no power because as the chair of the board, I was not necessarily able to make votes in the subcommittee. So once it came back to the bigger board, then I was able to facilitate the discussion to make the vote. But I sat into the finance committee because I wanted to understand the process. So it's important that you match the skills, expertise, and interest. The other thing is if you don't have the time, because board meetings are 2 or 3 times a month. They may last for 2 to 3 hours. When you're not doing that, you might be communicating with the executive director via email. So if you don't have the time, and I think it's important when you are doing your information to prospective board members to tell them straight out, this is what it entails to be a board member on our board. This is what we require of you. And if that person at this time do not have what is required, you know, there are other areas within the organization as a volunteer they might be able to serve, but it may not be prudent to the board to have them right now. I'm a firm believer that if you're going to do something, do it well. If you say you're committed and you're committed for a year or 2 years, that you are going to be committed to be there for the growth of that organization. And if you're not going to be, then maybe you should say, I can give you 2 hours to volunteer, but I'm not able to give you the 6 hours a month that is required as a board member. So this piece basically talks about the committee and drafting job description, each committee, there should be a description or job description about what they're undertaking. And if you cannot do job description, then there should just be an outline that is drafted by the board before they break into committees as to what are their mandate. Why are you asking for a executive committee? Why are you asking for a finance committee? Why are you asking for a recruitment committee? What are they going to be doing? What is the timeline involved in that committee? So is it a one-time meeting? Is it an ongoing committee? How do they report? Do they then form their own little board where there's a chair, a minute keeper, a treasurer, and how do they come to decisions? And then once those decisions are made, how do they bring those recommendations back to the board at large and then voted upon? So all of that has to be determined before the subcommittees start operation, because they are an entity again of the board. And the reason they are struck is to reduce the workload of the larger board. There's no way a board is able to do everything if we did not break the work into smaller committees. Because sometimes there are things that are time consuming that you just need an action made right here and then. And you need to be able to say, okay, the 3 of you take it, run with it, come back within 2 weeks, give us a decision, and then we can vote on it. So it's important to understand the roles as well. Questions? Which one? Is funding? There's a question around, is fundraising normally a board duty in other organization, nonprofit organization or charitable organization? Yes, fundraising normally, the extent of the fundraising is defined by the board, and the executive director is usually involved in that communication again. But there should be an element of board involvement in fundraising. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to be running a bake sale, the board doesn't have to be involved in that. That's petty cash type of money. The type of fundraising that I'm talking about is, we have had a program, and the program is very successful in the community, but the program has been cut. We're looking to raise $10,000, $15,000 to replace the funding that we've lost. How does the board then take a strategic plan and say, okay, this is how we annually will raise money to ensure that whenever there are cuts to the program, especially essential programs, we have the resource to do so without using up the excess fund that we have for salary in case there is a shortfall. Because every organization, every board votes on that there will be a certain amount of money that is excess for those emergency situations. So I believe there should be an active fundraising committee as part of the board. And when you do your strategic plan, that's part of the responsibility within the strategic plan, is to identify that particular area. Hopefully that answers the questions. Any other question? Okay, so I talked a lot about the financial statement and pieces before, so I'm going to move forward here a bit to talk a little bit about the hats we wear in the community. Conflict of interest policy, divide and loyalty. So when I represent an organization and I work for another organization, anything that I say or do within the context of a board is confidential. So I can't go to my workplace and say, oh, I had a meeting last night and we got funding from the federal government for X amount of dollars and this is how we got it. Can't do that. So it's very important that we understand that whole piece of conflict of interest, declare it at the beginning so that you don't run into situations where people think that you're using your position on the board to better yourself, to gain money, to gain a reputation, or you're using that organization resources without having the authority. It's important that you seek legal advice around the conflict of interest, declare it. It's important that every board seeks legal advice on the decisions that they're contentious decisions. The other thing that I'm going to say is it's important that we have a good perception in the community. And a lot of legal liability issues that comes up is around perception of how money is spent in the community. It's never really that there's mismanagement, but it's perception. I come in for a program and I think that something is not right. So I have the perception that this person is using the funds that is available to them for their own personal needs. So then I go out and I make, conversation with other people, and next thing you know, there is a lawsuit or a liability suit based on that perception. So I think it's important that we keep the financial aspect of a board above reproach. And when I say above reproach, you can only do that by having clear financial statements, reports that reflects what you're doing, and that way when you're challenged as to how the money is being used, you have an accountability and you have a paper trail to show exactly how those resources are divided. So, full disclosure, talked about it. You wear different hats, know the hats you're wearing, know when you're wearing them, and always try and stay true to the whole idea of confidentiality to the organization that you're representing. And when you're not sure, ask questions. So the organization in the community, again, You, as a chair of the board, represent the organization. The executive director might be the person who is the voice, the day-to-day voice, but when you are out in the community at large, you also represent that organization. So carry yourself in that way that leaves the organization with always a good impression in the community around the transparency. Questions? Moving on. So, who can sue you and why? Well, I have a bad day today and I've decided I don't like you? No, not really. If I perceive that you're mismanaging the money, if I perceive that you are using the money for your own purposes, if I perceive that you made decisions on behalf of the organization that is contrary to the mission of the organization, those are all situations in which I can come and file suit against you. In ways to avoid that, make sure that you are using the resources according to the mandate of the organization. I talk about perception, and I had questions around perception. And it's interesting that I think there are more, when I read the paper, there are more legal actions taken against individuals based on perception of wrongdoing than actual wrongdoing. And this is why the legal field is so interesting, is that if we had a clear definition of perception, I think it would be wonderful, because then before you went off and say anything against someone, you can say, okay, I'm going to go look up my perception definition. So before I spend $200,000 filing a lawsuit, maybe I should just kind of get the facts. And that's the other key piece. My perception and reality may not coincide with the actual fact. So it becomes very important that the perception, the facts match. Okay? So when I come to you and I say, I heard you got funding for the following program, and you got $3 million. In actuality, you only got $10,000. The person didn't get all the information correctly. They heard there were $3 million being given out and made the assumption that you got the money. So again, clear documentation is very, very important. Perception is one of those strange things, because I don't think it's something that you can go away from. We are human, and as humans, I think it's something that we will continue to have perspective on everything that's done. We have a say on everything that's done. Some of us have too much of a say on everything that's done, but it's a guiding force in our world, and I think one of the things that makes us so interesting is our ability to critique and get answers. So that's basically what it is. Critique and get answers, but go to the source and the correct source to get it. So if you're violating your duties as a member, you can be sued. If you're misusing funds, you can be sued. If you have individual actions, so I'm taking the money and I'm going to Casino Rama on the weekend, woohoo, for me, but no, I could be sued for using that. Trustee in bankruptcy, you may want to check with your organization to find out if your organization went into bankrupt situation, what is your legal responsibility. So this is where the insurance and the liability insurance that each organization has, these things should be clearly outlined in that part of it. If you're wasting the asset, so a vacation to Hawaii would be considered a waste of asset. May not be for you because it's a good vacation, but you're not funded to take a trip to Hawaii. One question. Time's going. So sitting on two boards or chair or, so the question is, I guess, can you sit on two boards as a chair, or both boards, is that divided loyalty? I have sat as chair of 3 boards at a given time, and I have declared my conflict of interest at the beginning, because if the board, one board worked with one of the programs in the community, so it's not impossible that you sit as a chair of both boards, but it needs to be declared at the beginning. Do you actually have the time? Because I could tell you the 3 years that I sat as chair of 3 boards, I didn't see my house. I didn't see my kids. I basically was at the organization every single day. My loyalty wasn't divided because I was passionate about what it is I was doing, but it's exhausting and it's time consuming. So yes, it's possible to sit as chair as both or 2 or 3 boards. Do you have the time to do it? Do you have the energy? Are you able to separate the jobs of each board? So those are some of the questions that you have to sit and ask yourself before you take on the responsibility of the chair. Because being a member of a board and being a chair is 2 different things. So a chair has a lot more responsibility than a board member. Okay, so I talked about the financial piece, and again, it's about making sure that, HST forms are filled, GST taxes are filed, reports go in on time. Those are all things that the chair and the executive director has to ensure. That the reports are updated, that it's kept in a place where it's accessible, and that you seek out accountants when you are doing financial report at the end of the year, that you get that legal person, to ensure that the audits are done properly, that there are times that you may have to audit the organization to also understand the legal implication of what you're doing. Unfortunately, one of the boards I sat on, we had to do a forensic audit because it was brought to our attention that there were mismanagement of funds. And I could say to you it's one of the most excruciating experiences I've ever sat through, because it brings into question the integrity of the members. It brings into question wonderful time. But the beautiful part of it is at the end, the experience taught us as board members about transparency. It also brought us closer to the members within the organization, because we had to work really closely with all members, including the executive director, to understand where that charge of mismanagement of fund came from. And it was great that we had a team in place who had done incredible work around the legal documentation of everything that we did with money, so that when we went through the audit, we were able to come out without any issue. So at this time, I'm almost done. I think I'm at that place now where I just have a couple more slides, so please bear with me. I have another 5 minutes or so, and then I will be wrapping it up. What I would like at the end is that if you could type in 1 word to basically let me know your feedback about the session, okay? So the pieces that I'm talking about here now is liability, slander, third-party sue. Again, please check with your liability insurance. Please check with your legal people to make sure you understand how these things are covered or dealt with. What type of coverage do you have? Do you as a board member need to get individual coverage? So does your insurance, does your liability insurance cover liable, slander, third party? Basically, if you participate in individual voting against a legal action, you can be held responsible, and that's not something that the board will cover. If you participate in taking the board's money and going and gambling with it, or going and buying a new car, or just mismanagement, that is not something that your liability insurance may cover, nor should it. So understand your liability insurance. Protect yourself. Make sure that each year, each new board member understands, as part of their orientation, the insurance around liability, the amount of liability insurance that exists, who do they call, who do they talk to if they are in that situation. Conflict of interest, breach of confidentiality, always, always leave room for you to be sued under those particular headings. So conflict of interest, breach of confidentiality, I think most of the suits that I've heard in the past has fallen under those 2 areas. So personal liability charge, we try and avoid again by having a clear understanding of those financial measures. So internal controls, I spoke about this as well. So things like the payroll, petty cash, cash reimbursement, all of those pieces, there needs to be policies in place to deal with it. It is charged to the executive director to ensure that those policies are implemented, but it's also something that the board needs to be very aware of to make sure that those policies does exist to help the executive director. One of the other things that I'd say is commingling of funds. In this day and age where we get funding from different sources, it's very easy for you to take money from one pot to support another. If you're going to do that, please make sure that the documentation of the usage is clearly outlined in the financial statement. So try to avoid commingling as a practice, but if it does happen, make sure the documentation is there. Directors or members involved in activities can be, it's not just being embarrassed, because it's not a personal embarrassment alone, it's an embarrassment for the agency. And again, we go back to that thing of perception. And a lot of organization has been closed in the past based on that kind of embarrassment, that kind of perception of not doing the right things on behalf of the funders, not doing the right things on behalf of the community. So let's stay away from it as much as possible. Human rights issue, there has been a clear mandate around the human rights issue and discrimination. So in our best interest, we try and practice inclusivity, best practice. We try and adhere to the standards as much as possible. Not saying that you're not going to err, and once you do, make sure that you do seek out legal counsel and correct it as soon as possible. So I've spoken about that, best practice, budgets. At this time, I basically wanted to say thank you to everyone who participated. Being a board member is one of the most rewarding things you can do. It's one of the most time-consuming as well. Do it because you want to make a difference. Do it because you have the time. And do it because you want to support the missions and values of a community organization. On Thursday the 13th at 10 o'clock at 10 to 11, we will be doing the Q&As for all the questions I didn't get to today. So this will give you an opportunity to go back and think about some of the questions that you may not have thought of right now. Please write them, and I will try and get an answer to you to the best of my ability or send you in a direction to do so. And our next session is June 25th at 10 a.m. on roles and responsibility. You guys have been a great audience, and I thank you very much for that.
And this is Juanita. This is Juanita again. We want to thank you for your participation. We want to say if you typed any questions in and the facilitator did not get to it, we will answer all your questions on this Q&A on Thursday.